In the first part of this video, I discussed why the government has no right to redistribute wealth as it pleases. This should be an obvious truth to anyone who values justice and freedom. However, the fact that this is obvious has not stopped the government from doing so. There is no evidence that the redistributionist policies are slowing down. Quite the contrary. All facts point to redistributionist policies escalating without end. So, what can a person who has only one vote do to protect themselves? The first thing that person needs to do is to understand the process. There was a time in the past when if the government wanted to spend, it needed to tax. It tended to be careful with its spending because taxation was, as it is now, unpopular. But now that the currency has been freed from the discipline of gold, the government can deficit spend. When this happens, the value of the currency tends to go down as the amount of currency increases. The depreciation of the currency is still a form of taxation, but it's not widely recognized as such. The taxation plunders the savers by silently sticking a hand in their pockets and removing a portion of their wealth. This plundering happens every time a new dollar is printed. We can see here that since the late 1960s, which was before the dollar was taken off of gold, the number of dollars has increased at a relentless pace of nearly 8% per year, rising from 47 billion to well over 2 trillion today. And this has caused the value of each of those notes to go down. It sure has. Let's take a look. Here is what has happened to the cost of living as measured by the Consumer Price Index. I'm multiplying the CPI by 1.35 to give it the same starting point on the graph as the currency in circulation. Notice that throughout the 1970s, the general price level increased as fast as the currency was created, and so one would be right to conclude that after the currency in circulation doubled from, let's say, 47 billion to 94 billion, that its purchasing power was cut in half. And then in the early 1980s, the methodology for calculating the Consumer Price Index changed significantly. One notable change was to replace the cost of housing with an equivalent rent concept. And there were other changes made along the way, such as introducing a substitution effect so that if the price of beef were to increase too quickly, the Bureau of Labor Statistics would assume consumers would buy more chicken. There were other changes too, such as hedonic adjustments that stated that if the quality of an item increased, the BLS would need to readjust its price in the index to reflect this deflationary impact. And I'm using deflationary in quotes here. All totaled, these changes resulting in the CPI no longer measuring a constant basket of goods and services. And as a result, the rate of increase in the CPI no longer followed the rate of currency creation. And I'll leave it up to you, my viewers, as to whether the CPI is an accurate measure of cost of living. I personally just look at the quantity of money as my gauge of what money is worth. Now, Abraham Lincoln once addressed a crowd and asked them how many legs a dog has if you count the tail as a leg. When they answered 5, he responded that the correct answer was 4. The fact that you call a tail a leg does not make it a leg. The same logic can be applied to cost of living. Just because the government tells us that it's not picking our pockets does not mean that our pockets are not getting lighter. So, what can the saver do to avoid being the target of redistributionist policies? Those who have been following my videos for a long time know what I'm about to say. Gold. It's pretty clear to see that over the long run, gold has increased in price at the same pace as currency has been created. Make no mistake though, this is not so much gold increasing in purchasing power as it is a reflection of the declining purchasing power of the currency. Of course, there are drawbacks to gold. Buy it at the wrong time, and maybe you'll lose purchasing power over the short run. If you bought in the early 1980s, this was certainly the case. If you bought it in 2011, this was also the case. But then again, if you bought it in 1970 or close to the year 2000, you did pretty well for yourself. So yeah, in the short to intermediate term, gold can be pretty volatile. How volatile? We often see short-term wiggles where the price of gold moves up or down 5% or so, and this happens very frequently. In fact, it's happening today where we're seeing a significant decline in the price of the metal. But these downswings are usually followed by upswings, and that's why the price chart of gold looks so rough. And then we have intermediate-term swings. These tend to be larger swings of 25 to 35%, and they can last several years. As an owner of gold, you just have to get used to them. The swings in value are just the price one needs to pay to avoid long-term destruction of one's wealth. So let's put the CPI back up on this chart. There are those who point to the CPI adjusted price of gold and say gold is expensive on a CPI adjusted basis. And that might be true if you're prone to calling a tail a leg, but I'd suggest that you take a look at the gold price relative to currency in circulation. I'm convinced that this is the right way to view gold, that is, in terms of currency in circulation. As I've said in many other videos, the Treasury itself has stated that the physical Federal Reserve notes printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing stand as first liens against all of the assets of the Federal Reserve. And so they stand as first liens against the gold certificates held by the Fed and, by logical argument, the gold held by the Treasury. So long as the Treasury does not add additional gold, the price of the gold will be pulled upwards as if by a magnet every time currency is created. Is gold's purchasing power actually increasing? Well, I think to a certain extent it is. Maybe by 1%, maybe 2% per year. The reason for this is that there are real improvements in efficiency and quality that have occurred over time. And it's more difficult to mine gold more efficiently than it was mined a decade ago than it is to make better cell phones, for example. And I'm not going to belabor this point. But man, oh man, look at that volatility. Surely we'd be better off keeping our savings in the bank or in short-term T-bills, right? I mean, at least those pay interest, unlike gold. So let's see what happened over the long term to someone who preferred the stability of a cash-like investment. The green curve I added here represents the wealth a person would have if he or she bought 3-month T-bills in the late 1960s and just reinvested the interest. A similar curve would be obtained for a bank savings account. Notice that at least until 1990, this person somewhat kept up with the rate of currency debasement, though I should state that I left out taxes on the interest, which would have been significant. But from 1990 onward, the compounded sum in T-bills or in a bank savings account would have barely kept pace with even the massaged CPI statistic. If taxes were included, then the saver would see his real purchasing power decline over time. The perception of how badly purchasing power was being siphoned off would depend upon whether the person was happy calling a tail a leg. So it really comes down to a choice. Can you make yourself comfortable with the wild swings in gold as the price to pay for long-term purchasing power stability? Or would you prefer the seemingly stable results of a cash-like investment that guarantees that you'll be the victim of redistributionist policies of an out-of-control government? I know what my answer is. Gold. Get you some.